Good morning. Well, I was meant to be preaching a few weeks ago, but I was taken rather ill, and so my husband Ben took my place. But you're in for a treat because I've got 2 weeks in a row now, so you'll have to bear with. So I'm Izzy, and this morning I'm going to be speaking about dysfunctional families. And I don't know about you, but I've got a lovely family, but we are a little dysfunctional. We're all a bit dysfunctional, aren't we? We all need repair in some places. Just this week, in my family, we've had major heart surgery. We've had a sickness bug that took down 9 people in just a matter of days. We've had one child pushed off scaffolding. We won't talk about the man who put the scaffolding there and left it. We have had another child pushed off a slide, but we've only got 2 children. It sounds like a lot of occurrences, but it's the same children doing the pushing off scaffolding, pushing off a slide, and I pushed my son into the pond. It was accidental, but it still happened. So my family is lovely, but we are still in need of God's repair. And this morning, I'm kicking off the new series on Joseph, and really, I'm just going to be listing the faults and failures of this dysfunctional family. We don't get a lot of, hope. We don't get a lot of God's hope in the first passage, but hopefully, the picture that I'm going to paint this morning is going to really help us appreciate God's transformative power in the weeks to come, because the story does get better, I promise. So God's transformative power can even change this dysfunctional bunch that we're looking at this morning. And really, there's 2 big lessons that I think we're going to be learning over the next few weeks from the story of Joseph. The formation of Christlike character and God's plan prevailing. Now the formation of Christ-like character, is going to be most appreciated by giving you a picture of Joseph at the beginning of the story and his whole family. And you'll just have to stick around for the rest of the series for it to get better, I'm afraid. Now, the musical calls him poor Joseph, and I'm going to call him faux pas Joseph this morning because he makes just too many mistakes. He seems like a bit of an airhead, a dreamer, some might call him. He makes a lot of mistakes that seem like they're pretty easy to avoid. The mistakes start even before our reading, actually. The verse just before told us that Joseph is tending the sheep with his brothers, and then he snitches on them to his dad. So Joseph brings Jacob a bad report about his brothers. Everyone knows you don't snitch on your brothers to your dad. You don't. Maybe that's a bit of a worldview rather than God's view, but everyone knows that, right? If you want to be liked by your peers. Now, Joseph's dad, he doesn't help matters because Joseph's his favourite. And he gives him this ornate robe, or maybe it was a technicolor dream coat, I'm not sure. Basically, a mark on his back saying, "Aim here, kick me," by his brothers. If his brothers didn't hate him for the snitching, they definitely hated him for being more loved by their dad, and the coat was just the cherry on the top. Now, the question going on in my head here is, if I was given this ornate robe by my mum and dad, and if I still wanted my sisters to like me, would I have worn it? And I think the answer is probably not, or maybe like to special occasions, or maybe when my mum and dad were watching, but like not any other times. But Joseph, he wears it all the time. And he probably gives a little twirl or something, I don't know. He really gets on with it, and his brothers hate him for it. Now, the next verse, it tells us that his brothers, knowing that Joseph was the preferred son, hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And then the next verse tells us that Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him all the more. You snitch, you wear the coat that makes you hated, and you're still hanging out with your brothers, telling them all your deep, dark secrets from the night time. I just don't think Joseph's going to learn. Faux pas, Joseph. Now, obviously the content of the dream didn't help matters. Joseph's sheaf of grain stood up while his brother's sheaves of grain bowed down to his. Joseph, stop. Please stop. He doesn't. He dreams again. And he tells the brothers his dream again. He doesn't really learn. He's just getting more and more hated. And once again, the content of the dream is not what you want to share with the people who hate you. Now, I think it starts to get better because it seems like Joseph has started using his common sense by verse 12, because his brothers are off grazing their sheep, but he's not with them. I think he's maybe learnt to avoid them. So, smart move. He's clocked that he's hated, and it's a bad idea hanging around them, showing off his preferred son cloak, and oversharing his bow down to me dreams. But the next verse, his dad asks him to go and find his brothers, and what's he say? He says, very well. Oh, yeah. So, this is where I'm starting to get really concerned. I think Joseph might have a screw loose, and not all the lights are turned on upstairs. Verse 15 says, a man found Joseph wandering around and asked him, what are you looking for? Joseph, you're a man on a mission. Your dad has told you to find your brothers. Why are you wandering around for long enough in a way that a stranger is concerned for you? Joseph really was quite the dreamer, it seems. Faux pas, Joseph. But maybe, Joseph is getting clever. Maybe he never actually meant to look for his brothers. Maybe he's actually avoiding it and staying out of the way. No, as fortune would have it, the stranger who was concerned about him wandering around aimlessly knew exactly where the brothers were, well enough to give him directions. And it says that Joseph went after his brothers. So, no, the lights are not on upstairs, unfortunately. Now, I'm sorry, it gets even more concerning. Okay, so this is the part of the story where you realise some of the strange decisions and absent-mindedness might run in the family. Now, the brothers saw him from a long way off, and as he approached, they plotted how to kill him. But Reuben, he didn't want to kill Joseph, so he planned his own rescue mission. The brothers didn't end up killing Joseph. They just bashed him about a bit, stole his cloak, and then threw him into an empty cistern. Okay, bizarre family warning. Without batting an eyelid, the next verse says, they sat down to eat their meal. They've just battered their brother, stolen his clothes, pushed him in a hole, and then they went and had a picnic. And I mean, I don't know if Joseph has lost his voice or something, or maybe they were within earshot of him screaming for his life. I don't know. Anyway, they had a picnic after pushing him in the hole to die. This is where the brothers casually decide, instead of killing their brother, they'll just sell him into slavery. It's not so bad, right? And then they'd split the money. So good plan, new good plan. So the Bright Spark brothers sold him for 20 shekels. Split between them, that's 2 shekels each. And I'm told by Google, that's $4. So doesn't seem like a great money-making scheme. But wait a minute. Reuben's got a rescue mission plan right. Reuben's going to save the day. He's going to pull Joseph out of the pit. No. Verse 29 says that when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. Reuben, where did you go? Were you not at the picnic? What? Where did you go? You watched your brothers push him around, throw him into a pit, and then have their picnic. You wanted to save him. Where did you go? Dysfunctional family. Maybe the brothers had their wits about them, after all, because their cover-up plan worked pretty well. They dipped the cloak in a goat's blood and took it to their dad. The money that they gained probably wouldn't have got them noticed. $4, no one's going to notice you spend that. But if the insanity of the guilt didn't hit straight away, it certainly would in the years to come. It says at the end of the chapter, then Jacob tore his clothes after hearing about his son's death, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. Now, we'll find out what happens to all of the brothers and all of this family as the series goes on, and it does get better. I can tell you that. I don't want to give too many plot spoilers, though. But you'll hear it's a pretty dysfunctional family. And Joseph has a bunch of character flaws he's dealing with. God's going to have to do some real transformation to make Joseph someone his brothers actually would bow down to, and B, reconcile this broken family. Plot spoiler, God does both. And as I said at the start, one of the major themes we see in the life of Joseph is the formation of Christ-like character. Transformation from a spoilt and unlikable dreamer to a humble and respected leader. Verse 29 of our Romans 8 passage says that those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. He's going to make us like Jesus. That goes for Joseph, and it also goes for us. God is working his transformation in us, but we're not always aware of it. It's not something that necessarily happens consciously, but often, as the series goes on, we'll see this too. It's often our life circumstances and how we respond to them with God that builds the fruit of the Spirit and Christ-like character in us. And I'll be speaking a bit more about that next week. In the coming weeks, we'll see that it was some completely dire life circumstances that were the training ground for Joseph to develop the Christ-like character to be able to lead and save thousands through a 7-year famine. Now, the other major theme that I mentioned at the beginning was that God's plan always prevails. God's plan always prevails. Romans 8:28 in our passage says, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And in verse 31 and 32 it says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Now, these verses don't necessarily mean that God will give us what we want when we want. But it does mean, and I quote Paul from the Bible, we have everything we need for life and godliness. And whether in good or bad or completely dire circumstances that we'll see in Joseph's life, God's plan is still to prosper and his purposes will be achieved. God's plan always prevails. So, we've seen a majorly dysfunctional family. hopefully that will help us appreciate God's transformation through all of this story. But next week, we're going to look at what it means to prosper according to God's plans, not our own plans. And it's most definitely not going to be the prosperity gospel, because Joseph's life is not the prosperity gospel. He doesn't have a nice car, doesn't have a nice job, doesn't have lots of money. He's a slave and a prisoner for most of his life. But, plot spoiler for next week, it says that God was with him and he prospered. So, next week we'll be looking at what it means to prosper. And until then, I'd like us just to take a minute and just think, what is dysfunctional in my life? What are my major character flaws? And what is in need of repair? And then invite God to just transform you and redeem them as you walk with him. And in this series, we're going to be thinking a lot about that. How do we become more Christ-like? And how do we let our circumstances, whether good or bad, help us to prosper? So I'm just going to leave a minute of silence. I'm going to read those questions again, and then we'll finish. What's dysfunctional in my life? What are my major character flaws? What is in need of repair? Where can God transform you and redeem you as you walk with him?